Well, we're back with another episode of Conversations and Connections. This, of course, is the official podcast of the Family Crisis Center of East Texas. I'm Stuart Burson, the prevention coordinator for the agency. And today we're going to talk about domestic violence issues in the workplace, what employers may want to look for and how they may want to treat or handle situations where an employee may be a victim of domestic violence. And so with us today, probably not a greater authority than Whitney Burran. Whitney Burran is our operations director here at the agency. Hey.
Hey, Stuart.
Oh, hey, I'm so glad you were wanting to do this.
I'm happy to be talking with you guys today.
And when we were talking about this, Whitney, you are really excited about this topic and the need to address this.
Yes,
really.
I'm very passionate about work places raising awareness concerning domestic violence in the workplace.
So first of all, just so we're kind of straight, people may be asking, well, what gives Whitney Burran the authority to talk about this? You're operations director, so what does that mean? What do you do for, I know what you do for us, but tell us what you do as operations director.
So at the agency, I handle all of the human resource responsibilities, essential duties and responsibilities for the agency. Okay. So the day-to-day operations and human resources. Well,
and just on the record, I'm not schmoozing to the HR people, but Whitney is a very good HR person. You are you're very approachable. Feels like I can come and talk to my little sister about something.
Well, I appreciate that. And that's very important. And I'm going to kind of go into that, today about how to be approachable and how to go about, responding.
Awesome. So why is it important for businesses to implement, when we talk about DV policies, what does that mean? What are we talking about when we say DV? And I'm sorry, I'm using the inside baseball lingo here. Domestic violence policies. Why is it that important? What are we talking about?
Okay, so first and foremost, to help ensure that a workplace is a safe environment for all employees. It is the business's leaders and human resources responsibility to create and support an environment where employees are comfortable to seek help from appropriate resources if they are ever victims of domestic violence. So it's important for management to create a workplace culture around domestic violence so employees are not afraid or ashamed to tell their employers about their domestic violence concerns.
Do you think this is something, now, how long have you been doing HR stuff?
Since 2011.
So technically, really not a whole lot of time, but let's say 2011, of course, take in consideration where you're working. Do you think the topic of domestic violence policies and things like that, has that been a concern very long? Do you think this is something new? Or do you think, let's say, 10 or 20 years ago, this would really be talked about in the human resources circles?
Well, I think that it's definitely something that's coming to light more. I think that as we progress, that it's important to know that I think that when people think about domestic violence, they don't often necessarily think about the workplace. And so I think that sometimes, it's important for your employers to feel like, well, this is none of my business or this is not happening at our workplace. But it comes through the door of your workplace every single day.
Right.
So
Sure. So some employers may feel, you just mentioned, they may feel something like, well, since it didn't happen here, it's really not our concern. What do you say to that?
I would say that it's very much their concern. So I'm just going to kind of give a statistic here. 1 in every 4 women and 1 in every 10 men will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. And I'm a member of the Society of Human Resource Management, which we call SHRM, and they recently did a study, and this was concerning to me. They found out that 65% of companies do not have formal workplace domestic violence prevention policies in place. And the research also showed that many business leaders did not even recognize domestic violence as a workplace issue.
What do you think that is?
Well, and that's just simply not the case, because, I think that it's important that domestic violence and sexual assault, like I said before, it walks through the doors each day of every workplace here in the United States, everywhere, across, everywhere. And so many people who are not educated about domestic violence think that it's, just a private family matter. And when we think of domestic violence, we typically don't think about the workplace, but we should, because domestic violence has no boundaries. Domestic violence does not stay at home. Individuals living with violence in their homes suffer in a variety of other areas in their life, and often real cost and negative impacts of their home life flow into the workplace.
Well, and that's a good point. I mean, besides the obvious, just having compassion for your employees, I guess it's something that is, I mean, and I don't mean to sound cold when I say this, but I think it is something to think about. The stresses that are related to survivors of domestic violence that can, when they bring that to work, that can affect productivity,
absolutely,
work, their performance at work and things like that, I guess, too, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Are there what about the legal issues surrounding this? Like, are they legally responsible to inquire if they suspect a employee may be a survivor of domestic violence? Are they legally required to look into that or to ask about that? I'm sure that's something that some employers may be a little
and that's a good question,
Stuart,
about. Because this is kind of a two-part answer. I'm going to kind of go into it first.
The floor is yours.
So Texas is an at-will employment state. There are currently no specific state or federal laws specifically related to DV in the workplace at this time that Texas has. But there are cases where victims of domestic violence and sexual assault in Texas have certain legal protections under the ADA or FMLA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act, Family Medical Leave Act. But in my opinion, for what that's worth, every workplace.
And you're not lack of opinion.
No, I'm not. I have a lot of opinions, so I'm going to just go with this one too. In my opinion, every workplace needs to have the policies in place. Domestic violence is a serious social issue, and it has negative effects on employees, individuals, our communities, everyone. So, are employers legally responsible to have policies specifically related to domestic violence? No. But is it their obligation and social responsibility? I would say yes.
Okay, good answer. Yeah, I mean, and I see where you're coming. Yeah, they're not they're not going to get in trouble. There's no legal ramifications if they don't. But
well, and another thing too is, if for employers on the employer side, if there is ever something that happens with, for example, if there was ever an injury or a death that occurred at a workplace as a result of domestic violence, an employer could be held liable for negligence if it's shown that if they knew that employer was being stalked or harassed or threatened outside of the work because by an intimate partner violence, and they did not take reasonable steps to protect that employee.
Go. Okay, there you go.
Hopefully, I think that the Texas legislator and Congress will move forward and do more to protect victims of domestic violence and sexual assault.
Do you know? And you may not know, and if you don't know the answer to this, that's fine. But you're talking about SHRM. Do you know, is SHRM pushing? Like, do they ever lobby in Austin for?
Sure, absolutely.
Well, SHRM, I don't know. Is that a state agency or is that
it's national? Yes,
national. Mm-hmm. So, do they ever lobby in Washington for this that you know of?
I'm not aware if they lobby specifically for domestic violence or sexual assault. They do, however, are very they are always going to encourage the employer to do the right thing and
Right, sure,
and be accommodating to any kind of need that your employee needs within reasonable.
Yeah, sure. I just find it fascinating because I just, like I said, I have an HR background, but I haven't been at it as long as what you are now. But I just feel that I would be hard pressed as a person in HR not to say something or to reach out to my employees or have something in place. And it's just kind of odd to think that a lot of employers may not.
Statistically, it was very shocking to me too to find out.
And maybe it's because it's something, like we said, this is something probably 15 or 20 years ago.
Sure.
Probably most employers really wouldn't even think about.
Exactly. Or talk about, because it's such a taboo topic.
Exactly.
And no one wants to talk about because it's not happening, but it does happen.
Exactly. Well, and this is a good transition to the next question I was wanting to ask you. What should employers look for? If an employee may be a survivor of domestic violence or sexual abuse, what is something that employers can look for?
Well, I would say the first step is training supervisors and managers on what domestic violence actually is, Stuart, because some people really just may not know what domestic violence is. And so we know, of course, because we work at the Family Crisis Center, that domestic violence is, an abuse that occurs within a domestic setting in a relationship, and the severity can, vary in any type. But, I think that some leaders may not even recognize the potential signs of domestic violence because sometimes that they're not always physically evident.
Right.
I think that sometimes, domestic violence is not always, physical. It can be victims dealing with, daily intimidation, verbal abuse, physical violence, and so spotting the signs can be difficult.
Sure.
So, however, like you had mentioned before, supervisors or, your employer may notice that an employee is, absent more frequently, or their productivity is kind of decreasing, the lack of concentration, they're exhibiting signs of anxiety or depression, excessive tardiness, just any kind of negative change in their work performance that's just not the norm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's say if you have an employee that comes forward, or for whatever reason, an employer finds out that they do have an employee that is having issues. They're having domestic violence issues at home. What can they do about that? Is there anything that they can do? Or if there is, what can they do?
So for many victims, and I think that we see this in the clients that we serve as well, maintaining employment is very difficult for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. So about half of the employed victims in various reports that I've studied and researched, clients and victims that have stated that they've lost their jobs or missed work due to domestic violence. So over half of those people surveyed, they've said that they've missed work and lost their jobs due to domestic violence. So that's important to know and be aware of. And so it's important to know when you're implementing these policies and looking at these policies and responding to victims of domestic violence, that victims need time. They need flexibility. They may have court appearances. They have to obtain, legal assistance, medical assistance.
Go to counseling.
Counseling, yes, yeah. Absolutely. Meetings with their domestic violence advocates, attorneys, finding places to live, childcare. So like I said before, it is, HR and management's responsibility to create a workplace culture around domestic violence, and develop and implement clear and concise domestic violence workplace policies to employees who are experiencing domestic violence, to help with job security and allow them to provide and protect themselves and their children, and to keep the workplace safe.
All right. What can employers do to protect their employees from domestic violence? And I guess, I don't know, I may be kind of rewording the last question I asked you in a
Well,
sense, but
well,
what kind of support can they offer? I kind of imagine it depends, and I may be completely off base. I almost kind of imagine it depends on the size of the company. A big, huge corporation
sure.
probably has more resources they can offer their employees than, let's say, a little, smaller operation here in
Absolutely.
East Texas.
Absolutely. So, and no, and that is a great question. So domestic violence in the workplace, it compromises the safety of both victims and coworkers in the workplace. So developing a policy that will promote safety in the workplace and respond to the needs of victims of domestic violence is very important. And it's important to know that employers should not discriminate against any employee for being or appearing to be a victim of domestic violence, whether in the hiring process, staffing, or promotions. So just implementing a policy with clear information about how to respond to domestic violence in the workplace and increase the awareness of domestic violence within the workplace and what resources are available for assistance. And that can look a lot of different ways. So if you have an employee who you have found is going through some sort of domestic violence situation, asking the victim what accommodations to the work environment would make them feel safer. But just a couple of examples to just kind of put this out there is just maybe having a lockdown procedure in case their abuser shows up on the premises. If it's available, maybe having the victim move to a different work area temporarily. Right. Just sure. Making sure if they've contacted law enforcement to make them familiar with the situation. But I also want to note this because it's important as well as while we want managers and supervisors and coworkers to be trained about domestic violence and the impact on the workplace and how to respond, we don't want them to take the role that should be filled by a professional. However, it's important for employers to train supervisors to recognize those signs. They need to know that they are not the professionals to help.
Right.
They can refer them to agencies like the Family Crisis Center or agencies in their area that assist victims of family violence. But it's not the employer's role to get counseling.
Well, I was going to say, they may have good intentions,
Absolutely.
But leave the counseling to the professionals, I guess, right?
You're making sure that you are being flexible for them and responding to them so the workplace is safe and keeping them safe. So asking them, because every situation is different. So asking, the individual what accommodations can be made in the workplace for them is a really good starting point. Sure.
Is there something that we haven't talked about or haven't touched on that you want to make sure that we do discuss?
I wanted to also kind of note that, we at the Family Crisis Center always say, in a perfect world, we would all be out of jobs.
Right.
Domestic violence, in a perfect world, domestic violence wouldn't exist. But, we know that domestic violence affects every race, ethnicity, gender, age. Domestic violence does not discriminate. So, although Texas employers are not mandated to implement or respond to victims of domestic violence, like I said before, it's a serious social problem that affects individuals negatively in our communities and in the workplace. So, employers can do their part to help end domestic violence by knowing the signs, engaging in ongoing workplace prevention programs, and supporting local domestic violence shelters like ours.
Yeah. I guess really it would be really great. And I don't know how many employers may do this, but in employee orientation, have just a little something about relationship violence.
Absolutely.
I guess. And here I am, I can't get words out of my mouth. I know we've mentioned this before in other episodes, but we've been spending about the past 20 minutes talking about domestic violence, and I think it's important to let people know that when we talk about domestic violence, it's not always necessarily intimate partner violence.
Absolutely.
This can be violence. It could be in the family. I mean, it could be parental abuse. Mm-hmm. It can be abuse from your roommate.
Absolutely.
It doesn't. When we talk about domestic violence, it's not necessarily romantic relationships. I just always wanted to make sure I get that across. Whitney, let's talk a little bit about Whitney before we wrap things up. How did you find yourself here? Tell us about little Whitney and how she found herself at the Family Crisis Center.
Well, my name is Whitney Burran, and I am, like Stuart said, I'm the operations director at the Family Crisis Center. I have been with the agency for 12 years now.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't look old enough to be
you're a baby.
Employed that long, do I? No.
You're a child.
I received my associate's degree from Angelina College in Human Services Case Management and my bachelor's degree from SFA, majoring in Public Administration. And during my coursework at Angelina College, I was made to complete an internship, and so that's how I found the Family Crisis Center, and I've been here ever since.
So you started here as an intern.
I did.
Wow. Okay. I don't know if I ever knew that or not.
Well, the more you know.
The more you know. And I always kind of like to. I was teasing Whitney before we recorded. I was going to ask her about this, but one of Whitney's biggest hobbies, her beloved pastime, besides working at the Family Crisis Center, are her chickens.
Yes, my chickens.
And not just regular. We're not talking about ordinary chickens. These are like show chickens.
Yes, ornamental chickens is what I like to call them.
Okay. So on Whitney's Facebook page, she has some interesting looking poultry on there.
So in my pastime, I raise chickens.
That's great.
Yes.
That's only in East Texas, right? Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Whitney. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate this.
I really enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you came on board to do that. Was kind of running out of people to talk about.
I kind of bullied my way onto the podcast.
Well, and that's what people. When I talk about Whitney's very approachable, you really are, and I think I can speak for most everyone here at the agency that Whitney is a good person to share a laugh with and to kind of joke around and things like that. So thanks, Whitney.
Thank you,
I
Stuart.
appreciate it.
I appreciate you.
If you have any questions or comments about the show, you can email us. I always like to give our email address out. This is conversationsandconnections@fccet.com. And if you feel like you need our services for any reason, I always like to give out also our toll-free 24-hour hotline. That number is 1-800-828-7233. That's 1-800-828-7233. And remember, as always, be the voice, if not for you, for someone else.